you could please take your seats. Thank you very much. Hi, good morning. If you could please take your seats, please. Thank you very much. So, welcome back. Welcome back to the second session of the day. We'll be talking about upgrading to a connected environment. So obviously, following on from this morning's discussions, we'll drill down into a little bit more of the detail around finished vehicle logistics and what's happening from an operational perspective in terms of importing and exporting cars. So we've got a good panel that we've pulled together to discuss some of the topics around, of course, finished vehicle logistics. So first up, we have Kurt Nagel, who's the CEO of the American Association of Port Authorities. And then we also have Emmanuel Van Dam, who's the Chief Commercial Officer from the Port of Zeebrugge, so bringing a different European perspective to the discussion. And then, of course, we'll be joined by Michael D'Angelo, who's the Manager of Port Operations for Volkswagen Group of America. So, as I said, we're here to talk about this. Not me. So, there's a free lunch for anybody who can tell me the name of this vessel. Pardon me? No. Another guess? Anyone? You were close there, Rick, though. I think it's a serious highway. There you go. So how many vessels? How many cars on that vessel? Capacity-wise? There you go. So, free lunch for you guys there. Yeah. So we saw this the other day as we were walking around, taking a walk around Baltimore. And of course, this vessel, I think came in from Bremerhaven on Sunday, I believe. I'm not sure what type of cars it contains, but obviously we'll be discussing that. And the implications of this size of vessel coming into ports, how do we deal with that? How do we manage that capacity? And what are some of the intricacies around developing and future-proofing the industry as we move forward? So first up, I'd like to invite Kurt Nagel, the CEO of American Association of Port Authorities, to give us an overview of some of the things that are happening from a port association perspective.
Well, thank you, Nimish. It's a pleasure to participate again in this program. It's also a pleasure to be in Baltimore, one of our active members of our association, in a port that not only is very certainly appropriate venue for a conference on finished vehicles, but is an extremely diverse port handling a full range of different types of cargoes, containers, et cetera. So it's a great opportunity you have to be here in the Port of Baltimore, and I'm certainly pleased to be with you here this morning. Just quickly, for those of you that might be familiar with the American Association of Port Authorities, we celebrated our 100th anniversary just about 6 years ago. For all of our members, we represent the ports throughout the Western Hemisphere. So in addition to the U.S. ports, we have ports in Canada, the Caribbean, and Central and South America. For that broad membership, a lot of what we do relates to some of the topics that you're discussing here, and that's to collaborate, partner, and share lessons learned, best practices to increase efficiencies, increase trade, et cetera. And then for our U.S. members, we also serve as the voice of the industry down the road here in Washington, D.C., and advocate for policies and programs that benefit not only ports, but again, the movement of goods, including cars, into and out of our nation's ports. And also then, in terms of, again, some of the specific issues related to this particular session, we foster partnerships with allied groups and organizations and stakeholders, and some of that obviously relates to some of the connectivity that we'll be talking about this morning. Just a couple of broad statistics Nimish mentioned from a kind of a broad American Association of Port Authority view. Nation's ports account for over a quarter of our nation's economy, the trade that's moving through our ports. They also support over 23 million American jobs, and also importantly, as it relates to public policy, that activity generates over $320 billion a year in local, state, and federal tax revenues. So we think it's important that some of that revenue be poured back into investment in maintaining and improving the infrastructure that enables that trade and commerce to take place. While port authorities and their private sector partners focus primarily on their facilities, terminals, et cetera, right at the port itself, clearly the connections on both sides of those facilities are absolutely critical. Both the landside connections, the first mile, the last mile, whether it's connecting to the closest interstate highway system or the closest mainline railroad, or in some cases barge to inland or to and from inland destinations, and then the waterside connections, the federal navigation channels that connect us literally to the global marketplace, need to be maintained and improved to accommodate that trade. But connections, and particularly the connections that you're primarily interested in this section, are not only physical connections, but also virtual connections in terms of data portals, a digitization of data, and other ways beyond physical infrastructure to increase the efficiency, reduce delays, reduce congestion, and improve the overall supply chain. Just some of the broad challenges that are impacting the flow of goods into and out of our ports. Trade growth, obviously, ports need to be able to accommodate the increases in trade that we've already seen and that are projected to continue down the road. New policymakers and leadership, again, in Washington, D.C. We still have at least a relatively new administration in Washington, and we've seen already a number of changes in leadership in some of the pertinent committees in Congress, both in the House and Senate, and with some of the retirements that are already announced. Obviously, House Majority Leader Paul Ryan and Transportation Infrastructure Committee Chair Bud Schuster have both announced their retirement. So we will have new leadership, and then pending the outcome of the midterm elections, potentially a change even further in terms of leadership in some of those committees. So that's something that we continue to work on. As I mentioned, critical need for infrastructure investment, both on the land side and the water side. It's limited funding at both the local and state and federal level, limited waterfront land, changing trade patterns and markets, but again, related to this discussion, innovation and technology. That's also not only a challenge, but I think also an opportunity for all of us in terms of increasing the flow of goods and the flow of information. The solutions that ports are looking at to certainly look toward future-proofing not only their facilities, but their digital and data infrastructure. Connectivity is important in terms of digitization, data portals, and having redundant networks. Resiliency of both the electrical supply, overall energy supply, as well as the telecommunications network, and cybersecurity, particularly in the age of the Internet of Things, continues to be a very challenging but important aspect of not only what we do with our members at the association, but throughout the supply chain. We have an information technology committee and a security committee that work hand in hand in terms of cybersecurity. In terms of the broader aspect of digitization and data portals, et cetera, we conducted a smart ports workshop out in Oakland earlier this year, where a lot of these issues were discussed. Related to connectivity, I think more and more, certainly of port customers, port stakeholders, are looking for increasing visibility in terms of the visibility of their cargo, when it's going to be available, when it's going to arrive, and broader throughout the supply chain. I think the digitization of data provides an opportunity for public port authorities to show leadership in the trade community and to provide avenues for that increasing flow of information. And a number of major ports have already and are in various stages of new digital platforms that provide customers with increased information, increased efficiencies, et cetera. A few examples in that. One of the first, and a couple of these relate to containers, but obviously the concept would be similar for all types of cargo, including vehicles. Back in 2015, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey introduced their terminal information portal system, or TIPS, that provided information throughout the various terminals throughout the Port of New York, New Jersey, in terms of vessel arrivals, container availability, et cetera. And then just about a year or so ago, the Port of Los Angeles, working with GE, put forth their Port Optimizer, which is also available to other ports. The Port of Long Beach recently announced they were going to become a part of that, and that kind of broadens the flow of information and data further throughout the supply chain, more toward moving at least toward a kind of from a manufacturer production to consumer process. The Port of Oakland also introduced earlier this year the Oakland Portal that provides additional information in terms of digital platform. And also we're seeing that in not only the very large ports, but some of the, I think, a broader range of ports are looking at those things. One example, the Port of Halifax, also earlier this year has started providing additional digitization of data and data portals for their stakeholders. In terms of resiliency, one of the other things that we do as an association is to provide that forum of information whenever whether it's a natural disaster, whether it's a hurricane or other event. There's always lessons learned to be gained from that. And some of the earlier major storms, whether it was Katrina, Hurricane Sandy, et cetera, had some physical infrastructure lessons learned in terms of preparing and responding and resiliency to natural events. But also what we saw in one of the more recent aspects, including in Puerto Rico, was the increasing importance of being able to bring the telecommunications network back up and operating as quickly as possible. In Puerto Rico, there were supplies at the ports. They had sufficient trucks, but they weren't able to communicate with the drivers in terms of where they should come to pick up the cargo, where they should go, et cetera. So resiliency in terms of telecommunications network, I think, is increasingly important. And then also in terms of energy supplies and electrical supplies, again, a number of ports are looking at opportunities for either self-generation, et cetera, to provide that not only electrical power, but redundancy in case the grid does go down and the ports are still able to operate. One example in this environment is Toyota and their facility at the Port of Long Beach. Toyota is looking at not only kind of revamping the facility to increase efficiencies, reduce congestions, reduce emissions, but they're also planning to generate their own electricity through a fuel cell plant that would generate enough electricity for not only their use at their terminal, but would be able to sell some of that power back to the grid. So those types of things, I think, are being looked at in terms of resiliency in a number of areas. I mentioned cybersecurity, and certainly that's an increasing concern not only for ports, but I think for really everyone, not only in the supply chain, but in many other areas of business and government as well. Certainly protecting confidential data is important, but also related to being able to continue to operate. Talked about the Internet of Things and with smart technology, and we're certainly seeing that increasing types of equipment at ports, whether it's cranes, yard equipment, gate access controls, et cetera. So while that obviously provides many benefits, it certainly increases the potential vulnerability to disruption. So ensuring that cyber threats are adequately addressed and protected from to the degree possible, and as certainly all of you know, that is a continually evolving challenge on a day-to-day basis. We had a security seminar just a couple weeks ago up in Chicago where we had both federal as well as local public and private folks coming together and talking about those issues, but it clearly continues to be a concern and a challenge. I mentioned our Information Technology and Security Committee. Those two committees have jointly formed a cyber working group that meet at least virtually regularly to talk about the most recent issues and lessons learned and best practices as it relates to cybersecurity of these data portals and the networks that we more and more are relying on for efficient movement of goods. The session also wanted to talk about some disruptive technologies and a couple areas that certainly fit related to not only the port but again the supply chain environment is the concept of blockchain, and certainly in the maritime environment, one of the more recent things is the Maersk IBM joint venture announced earlier this year, where they're in development of a blockchain that would not only be available for Maersk movements, but the broader trade community. So it's something that certainly has a lot of potential, a lot of questions at this point still, but certainly has a potential to be a disruptive technology. We've had a couple of pilots that have been done on that. The Port of Houston's been involved in a pilot related to that, as well as the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Certainly the end goal is to have end-to-end supply chain visibility and naturally also a paperless environment. Some of the projections there indicate that under that type of a system, international trade could increase by as much as 15%, which obviously the resulting impact on the economy, jobs, et cetera. The second, I think, disruptive technology potential relates to automated cargo handling equipment, again, not only from a cyber standpoint, but from a skills and labor perspective, changing from potentially physical labor to more automated, technologically centric labor has certainly the potential impact of disruptive technology. Just quickly, as terms of what ports and their private sector partners are doing to address both the physical investment, infrastructure investment, as well as technology. We did a survey. Our members and their private sector partners plan to invest over $155 billion over the next 5 years in that infrastructure, both physical and digital. Our biggest concern, frankly, from an investment and infrastructure standpoint, is the federal government down the road here in Washington has not been upholding really its end of the partnership in terms of investment primarily in those landside and waterside connections into and out of port facilities. We've identified about $66 billion in federal investment that's needed over the next 10 years. That's roughly evenly split between waterside, maintaining federal navigation channels, deepening and widening them where necessary, and then again the landside connections, first mile and last mile. We have a campaign, America Keep It Moving, that focuses on that supply chain, and certainly we encourage all of our industry partners to work together. The more we're on the same message in terms of the needs of the supply chain as we move goods in and out of this country will benefit us all. Thank you. Sorry, I ran a little over.
Thanks very much, Kurt. That was great. Interesting to see some of the things that you're working on, both connecting the physical and the digital as well. I think, of course, the issues around cybersecurity are becoming more prevalent as we move to that digitalization, and more elements of the facilities and the network become more connected. We also have to consider those kind of things as well, and of course how we're going to develop the skills and attract the talent in order to meet those demands as well. So next up, I'd like to invite Emmanuel to bring his presentation and his perspectives from a European port perspective. So thanks very much.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Emmanuel van Dam. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer of the Port of Zeebrugge. And I have been invited by the organizers of this conference to give a testimonial how we are treating in Europe and in Port of Zeebrugge in particular some infrastructural updates that need to be done in the port environment to face the current and future needs. For those who do not know this, the Port of Zeebrugge is a port in Belgium, one of the smaller countries in Europe, but quite well performing in logistics. So to give you an idea, the coast of Belgium measures like 40 miles, but together with the Port of Antwerp, we're quite strong in our position. Now, the Port of Zeebrugge is owned by the city of Bruges, that you probably do know, and we have been in a transition from a landlord port concept to also act as a business development port concept together with the terminals and the shipping lines. I've been asked by the organizers to limit the sales and marketing talk, so I will respect that. So I only have one single slide for that. And that's this one. So this is a print from a very famous finished vehicles magazine that showed that we handled 2.7 million units in the year 2016. And we're quite humble at that, so we grew again in 2017, where we handled over 2.8 million new cars. And we're quite confident that we will maintain that level this year. So who are our customers? At the end of the day, terminals and shipping lines, of course, well represented right here, but almost all car OEMs, car makes use the port of Zeebrugge, including many American brands. We are also, due to our geographical position, considered as one of the ports of the United Kingdom, and I will come back to that later on. So the topic today is how to upgrade the environment. Well, this was the environment that we had to operate in. Until the year 1982, we didn't handle a single car in the port of Zeebrugge. And this is a picture of the inner port, charcoal handling, polluting. But we are operating in a residential area, a small coastline. So strategically, we said we have to stop this. And we have to look into a segment, to an industry that needs a zero compromise, non-polluting environment. And then the automotive sector came up. So we were able to offer zero compromise terminal facilities to our main investors from Japan and from the Scandinavian countries. And this is what it looks today. So it's a pure finished vehicle logistics platform. So I made the translation in acres. So it's like 7,400 acres, of which over 1,300 acres are dedicated to new finished vehicles handling. So what are we facing today in terms of new fuel technologies, etc.? Before talking about new technology for cars, we also look at new technology for vessels. At the end of the day, if the OEMs want to reduce their CO2 emission, they look at the total supply chain. And this is a totally different picture that we have in Europe compared to the US. So it was really good to see the presentation from PwC on the US situation, because in Europe, all the indicators are in the green. Green meaning reduce CO2 dramatically. So the use of LNG is one of the important factors in that. So last year we had a $500 million investment into the upgrade of our LNG terminal. Now what's the link with the automotive industry? For example, this one. It shows the bunkering of an intra-European car carrier operated by UECC in the port of Zeebrugge. So we don't have a Jones Act, we have regular lines serving many European countries. And this is an important factor, how the OEM can include a significant CO2 reduction. As a trend, we also see that the dual formulas, so the hybrid formulas, are chosen by the main operators. And how do we do this? Well, you have an investment of Engie, the French company, energy company, together with Japanese investors and Chinese investors who teamed up to invest in the first LNG bunkering vessel that is actually seagoing. So we see that the industry is really gearing up to further supply LNG into the market, also for the RoRo sector. And as a port authority, we're following these steps, and we invested in LNG supply for trucks. So we are fueling trucks with LNG and distribution in the port. Now, when we look at the finished vehicles, there you have the various options that have already been touched upon today. Hydrogen, for example. So for the European market, the Toyota, Mirai, and also the Prius, well, these were all launched in the port of Zeebrugge. But where are we going with that technology? We don't know, because there's only, to give you an idea, in the Benelux, not even 10 fueling points for hydrogen. So we expect that only in 3 to 5 years from now, we will have even fueling points for these vehicles in the port. Then, of course, we have to talk about the electrical vehicle. So the brand, the car brand that's maybe going private later this week has already been mentioned. And the people you see up front are governmental representatives from the Benelux, the ministers, etc. This is really high on the agenda. So we are looking at a share of like almost 10% in 5 to 10 years' time. And what is the impact on that? Well, here you have a picture of the Wallenius Wilhelmsen Solutions terminal, one part of the terminal in the port of Zeebrugge. They are investing $40 million to increase the capacity of the terminal, but also to install 200 charging stations for these electrical vehicles. So these are like 10 stations for 20 vehicles that can be charged within an hour to give them enough power to drive, let's say, for 78 miles. So what is the impact for the Port Authority? We have to make sure that the electricity grids, etc., are sufficient. Same thing for the vessels, shore power, because the port areas are considered as quite polluting areas in Europe. So we have some clear indications and instructions from the European Commission to reduce this. So we look at this shore power to reduce the emissions from the RoRo vessels. How do we do this? Well, we can use the solar pillars of companies in the port. And this is, again, an example of the clean port concept that we have in the port of Zeebrugge. This is the warehouse run by Nestle, where they store the green coffee that goes into the Nespresso cups. So they cannot operate in an environment where you have petrochemical industry and whatsoever. It's a completely CO2 neutral installation. So we are looking how can we use some solar power from their roof and to link it with the RoRo terminals that are located nearby. Wind energy, same thing. We have developed a wind energy plan for the entire port area. So each and every time a terminal wants to expand, they look together with us, and we have started a dedicated company for that. How can we invest in energy? How can we optimize that? And they even become the shareholders of the new codes that are established for that. Now, if we look then at the infrastructure for self-guided cars and autonomous driving, there the predictions, as we saw in PwC, are quite similar, of course, because it's a lot of American technology. So we believe that autonomous driving will be like realistic 2030, 2040, electric vehicles early 2025. But the impact, we have to be, we need some forecasting on it and start already implement our infrastructure for that. So what are we doing? We have already finalized all the red new roads in the port to make sure that we have dedicated driving lanes for these autonomous vehicles. To give you an idea, Volvo has 3 major plants in the world. One of them is in Belgium, in Ghent. Volvo, it's actually a Chinese company, Geely. As from the year 2020, the vehicles will drive autonomously from the production to the terminal without any single driver in it. So we need corridors for platooning as well. Now, when we look then at terminal layouts, what about intelligent charging lanes. This is probably going to happen. The vessel stevedoring will also be different. So on the planning tools, etc., on the software, there's a lot of impact right there that's being looked at today. Then we have the telematics. All the premium vehicles, today they already send signals from the car to the terminal to inform the terminal that tire is running flat, oil pressure is down, or even the trunk is open, okay? So this is probably going to happen for many standard vehicles as well. What are they relying on? It's the layout of a 5G network, mobile network in the port to do that. So we are already in projects with the network suppliers to supply sufficient fiber networks in the port to then start with 5G networking. And then, as mentioned earlier, cybersecurity is important because you can imagine that OEMs like Honda, for example, want to avoid that other OEMs would like copy technology just by hacking the signal between the car and the terminal. We should not forget what the impact of all of this could be on port labor. So this is a picture of, let's say, 76 Lamborghinis being loaded on a WWL vessel. Will this be done automatically in the future? I have my doubts about that. So there will probably be still a need for separate lanes in the port for this type of premium vehicles. Now, how can we then optimize the traffic flows? And there we come to the blockchain application and disruptive technologies. The Port of Zeebrugge will be the launching port in Europe for an application such as Truckmeister. What does this do? It's an app for the truck drivers. You can compare it to the Waze application for route planning, but it will have also all the communications directly with the terminals. It will inform the truck driver which bridges are open, which route to take, what the queuing times are at terminals, at fuel stations, etc. So really an interesting tool that is going live in January 2019, which should reduce congestion in the ports, because congestion is one of the main issues in the ports, as you know. How do you look at the evolution of the market? We believe that the market will grow, even on the US. So we want to continue to offer zero compromise solutions for your industry. We have opened a new highway last year, which was an $850 million investment. We see already increased PDI and value-added logistics activities in the port. We are really clear on the fact that these PDI centers are considered by the OEMs, certainly in Europe, as a part of the production process. So to anticipate in the growth, we have given both WWL and ICO, which is an NYK company, additional land to further develop their activities in the port, and we will be able, upon completion of these projects, to handle 16 RoRo vessels at a time in Zeebrugge. Now, containers have also been touched upon, so we must be sure that these RoRo terminals have a good connection with the container terminals. So this picture shows you the Volvo S90 vehicles that's imported in Europe in containers. It's 3 containers per 40-foot, 3 cars, sorry, per 40-foot container. And then we are also in the process to look for return cargo. I started the presentation by saying that we're considered as one of the ports that supply the UK. So I have to say something about this. Some people in Europe, called the Britons, have decided to leave the EU. Almost half of our tonnage has a link with the EU. So, and nobody knows what's going to happen in March 2019. The situation is even getting worse day by day. We're really in the mist, even in the dark. So there are various scenarios. This is where we are using blockchain and disruptive technology. We have started, together with all the terminal port companies, etc., a company called RxC Port, with the tagline, we're going to make the Port of Zeebrugge Brexit-proof. What does it mean? We have programmed all the possible Brexit scenarios that we can activate from the day the decision is made, so that there's no congestion, well, inspections will be needed, on the data flows, etc. It's a huge project, but the company has been started, has gone live 2 weeks ago, So we are ready for that. Another example of blockchain technology is the following, that we have developed intermodal route planners. If you want to know as an OEM, how can I get from a production site, let's say in the south of Italy, Naples, until to go to Dublin in Ireland, well, you just type in the postal area codes, the zip codes of the origin and the destination, and the system will give you out of a database with 40,000 terminal combinations in Europe, the link, how you can put it on the train until Zeebrugge, and then the number of shipping lines that operate to Dublin, etc., etc. So, thank you. I don't have any time left, but I would like to invite you to our board, and I'm here for the conference if you have any further questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Manuel. So thank you very much, Manuel. This was really interesting, again, to see some of the physical infrastructure development programs that you put into place, and again, looking at some of those digital things as well. And of course, the issues around Brexit still, those levels of uncertainty continue to disrupt the various levels of the industry. So next up, I'd like to invite Michael D'Angelo, Manager of Port Operations for Volkswagen Group, to come and talk about some of the things that he's been working on. Thanks very much.
Okay. Good morning. You know, a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is conceptual, perhaps far-fetched, but I'd like to continue the conversation that Kurt and Emmanuel started with what they're doing at the ports with their technology and infrastructure. It's probably my duty as the millennial on the panel to talk about future technology and future business models. So I'd like to start off with actually a poll. So if you can get your red and green cards out. In the past 10 years, would you say you're largely using the same business models and same technologies to support those business models? Okay, a lot of red. So everyone's saying that in 10 years they've seen drastic changes in both business models and technology. Okay, interesting. So I want to start off by discussing disruptive technologies that have been introduced since 2007. First, we have the smartphone, the iPhone. First introduced in 2007. The first year it sold 140 million units. Today, in 2017-18, 1.3 billion. So everyone's connected. Everyone has instant access to information. Netflix began streaming their content in 2007, believe it or not. What that gave consumers is instant gratification, instant access to content. With these two together, consumers are now conditioned to want information, technology, content instantaneously. Both Kurt and Emmanuel talked about blockchain, originally developed in 2008 to support Bitcoin. The opportunities for blockchain applications seems to be endless. Tesla made the list not because of their battery power or their design. Tesla's on the list more so for how they apply big data, how they collect information from the consumer, and how information is then sent to their vehicles. More a tech company than an automotive company in a lot of respects. Waymo, Google subsidiary, they were amongst the first to begin autonomous vehicles. I was actually at a conference last year, and Mary Cummings, Duke Professor of Engineering, and the Director of Humans and Autonomy at Duke, said that complete autonomous vehicles in the infrastructure is probably 20, 30 years out still. Sure beats a lot of the forecasts that we've been hearing, but it's coming. Does anybody know what that image is? IBM's Watson. Watson is the forebearer to a lot of artificial intelligence, human to machine interaction. Uber, fleet sharing. Of course, not the only operation out there, but Uber's only 7 years old. Since then, we've seen Lyft, Zipcar is certainly in that conversation as well, but utilizing assets in different ways. It's interesting that 80% of a vehicle's life is spent idle. So these types of business models are changing that, utilizing more assets more frequently. Yes, it's a robot. Yes, robots have been around for a long time. This robot's on the list because in 2013 and 14, we saw great advancements in robot agility. Robots can now run, walk over uneven terrain, mimic human movements. The addition to robot technology is going to potentially shift a lot of our labor concerns. Yes, again, drones have been around for a lot longer than 2017. However, the drone technology is on the list because that's when the first commercial drone delivery took place. Finally, that is Twitter, but it's representative of social media in general. Over the past 10 years, the proliferation of social media in our everyday lives just continues to grow. We use it every day. This is how we get a lot of our news, a lot of our updates, a lot of our information. It's created transparency, and it's given consumers access to information even faster. Now I'd like to talk about, disruptive technologies introduced for finished vehicle logistics. That's the list. I say that somewhat jokingly, but it helps to illustrate the point that as an industry, we tend to lag and not leverage the technologies available to us as quickly as we could. Certainly, there are some honorable mentions. Audi in Ingolstadt uses the automated vehicle mover to shift 2,000 vehicles roughly per day. Autonomous vessels. We expect to see great progress in this autonomous transport mode in the near future. Mercedes has been testing autonomous trucking amongst other entities. So certainly progress, but nothing that's largely been introduced and has been disruptive in finished vehicle logistics. Now, shift the conversation to technologies that we could potentially leverage moving forward. We are really good at telling a customer where their car came from and where it's at. I think we can do better at telling them when it's actually going to get there. I want to move more towards advanced optimization software. A lot of us are already doing this. I think we can do it better. What does that mean? Enhanced processing logic. Whenever a vehicle moves from one hand to the next, the clock is reset to 0. So rather, let's look at the entire lifespan of the vehicle and understand where it's coming from, where it has to go, and by when. Can we please agree to stop spreadsheets? We're in a digital age. Information should be passed digitally and not off spreadsheets that we pass back and forth. Blockchain. Again, both Emmanuel and Kurt touched upon this. Securely sharing information across multiple entities internationally. Telematics. What these vehicles can tell us is endless. Interaction between the customer and the vehicle, now getting towards information shared between the OEM and the customer and even the vendors. Imagine a vehicle that comes off a boat and says, I need not only my tire pressure changed, but I also need floor mats, I need a spoiler, and I have to be to the dealer in 3 days. All vehicles coming in have that information, and it gives the ports and processors better information to process, ship out our vehicles. Future business models, asset sharing. We do this with railroads. We do this with passenger vehicles. Volkswagen actually has been piloting their Moia van in Hamburg, a 90 square mile grid with 35 vans, 2,000 riders, and 50% of the rides have been shared over 100,000 rides. It's a concept that's growing. It's gaining traction. I challenge this industry to look further into it with our trucking, perhaps even our vessels. It's effective use of assets, reduces costs, and it maximizes our profit. Home delivery. Is it far-fetched to think that one day dealerships may go away? I don't know. But home delivery is certainly a business model to entertain and explore. Is it far-fetched to think that a vehicle could drive itself to dealers' nearby ports? Perhaps. Transportation to tech. This is basically more technology, less assets. Let's utilize the assets we have better, more intelligently. So instead of purchasing capacity, purchasing labor, let's purchase technology. So what I have now are a couple of models. Again, these are conceptual, but it helps to paint a picture of what could be in the future. Vehicle begins in a factory. Robots move it from the factory to the port. Perhaps even a robot drives it onto the vessel, gets onto an autonomous vessel. Robot drives it off. Robot drives it through the port activity, gets onto a fleet share autonomous truck, delivered to the dealer. All interactions supported by blockchain. Updates given to the customer real time while they're watching Netflix and tweeting about it. If you think that's a little bit of a stretch, I got one more for you. Factory, self-driving car with telematics tells the port exactly when it has to go and what has to be done to it. Gets onto an autonomous truck, or vessel rather, drives itself off, again telling the port processor what has to be done to it, where it has to go, by when, delivers to the home. Supported by blockchain, real-time updates with artificial intelligence technology, interaction between the customer and the computer, and potentially even the vehicle, while watching Netflix and tweeting about it. So I'd like to end with, what are you doing to prepare for the future? Before we ended the last session, the poll was put up about what's your major challenge. The results largely came back with capacity, with assets, with labor. I disagree. I think the real answer was planning and transparency. If you're transparent and you plan properly and have the tools to do it, you mitigate those other two. So what are you doing to prepare for the future? Are you investing in labor? Or are you investing in technology? That's it. Thank you. Need some time back.
That's okay, no problem. So thanks very much, Michael. It was interesting to see that the different scenarios you put there. Hopefully you're all tweeting about this, but not watching Netflix. So I'd like to open this up to the floor if there's any questions that people would like to ask. I think there's a question from my good friend Marty there in the front.
Marty Kolbick from Auto Warehousing. And I certainly appreciate the initiatives that are going on as far as the connected vehicle. I'm a member of a group, the Automotive Industry Action Group, that is trying to standardize transmissions of the connected vehicle. And the roadblock that we continue to run into as an industry, as a total supply chain, usually starts with the OEMs and their reticence to share their information with the people that actually handle the vehicles. How do we overcome that wall that's been put up over the years, and it's starting to come down, but how do we, and my question is also, how does Zeebrugge handle it? Are the OEMs sharing their information with Zeebrugge to make it more fluid, to make it easier to move the vehicles? And like, what do you think? Are the OEMs going to make that change eventually?
On the first part of your question, having worked like 5 to 6 years in the aviation industry, a similar transition in shipping should happen. What has been realized there. I mean, if you have a departure control system in an airport, the handler, etc., the aviation company, the customer, the travel agent, you work on system A or B. I think today it's still Amadeus or Galileo. Before you had 4, so it's consolidated. Something similar should happen in this industry because it's, in my opinion, the only guarantee that all wishes from the OEMs and the operators can be brought forward, and then we can go into the next step. if you order something on Amazon, you can track everything, okay? If you want to know where your car is, it's probably more expensive than an Amazon package, you don't know. So that's probably a challenge for you.
Right.
On your second part of your question, in Europe, the challenges are still similar, but we're not in the phase yet to make any investment to have like a single platform for connectivity between OEMs, etc., and port terminals. So what I believe that should happen is the following, that the OEMs talk with the shipping lines, because you have to look at it from a global perspective and avoid double work. Because if a German buys a Mercedes SUV, it's made in the US. If you buy a Mercedes sports car, it's made in Germany. So the demand of the OEM for terminal communication, cybersecurity, etc., will be exactly the same. So the ones that have realized more transparency are the ones that operate their own terminals, Toyota, for example. For the other ones, for the open terminals, it's not in that stage yet.
You know, to further elaborate, I certainly hope so. I hope the OEMs get to a point where they can provide that data to the vendors. I believe the customers are going to demand it. It'll certainly make us more efficient. When it will happen, I couldn't tell you. As Emmanuel said, it's a 50,000 plus vehicle sometimes, and we can tell a customer when their kitchen knives are going to arrive, but we have trouble sometimes with vehicle transportation, and I think sharing that information is only going to make us better.
For you is that in your presentation you talked about these great initiatives that are going on at a lot of the ports regarding information flowing in, electronic information. Is there any way to standardize the progress so that we're not tripping over each other with different forms of technology and the shipbuilders are building in one direction and suddenly the ports go in another direction? Is there some kind of a committee or someone that's putting together some form of standardization for the information to flow across the entire network?
I think that is a challenge, and that's one of the things that is being part of, for instance, the port optimizer scenario that's with Port of Los Angeles and GE and other ports that are becoming engaged in that. I think that's one of the kind of the initial challenges, is to ensure that there is that kind of interoperability, et cetera. I know certainly one of the things you hear about when blockchain is discussed is that is one of the things that obviously is going to be required as part of that there is that ability to not only have, whether it's a standard system or at least a system that allows multiple essentially formats and platforms to be able to interact. So I think that is a challenge. I think some of the things that are being done with the notion is, to some degree, they're kind of related to the future-proofing reference that I made in the presentation, is that to design the platforms that you do have that flexibility. To some degree, with Michael's more millennial perspective, that we used to build things and you say, well, okay, this is going to last 15, 20, 30, 40 years, whatever the case may be. And then when new technology came in, it's like, well, how do we retrofit that to accommodate that? I think the digitization type things that are being looked at are anticipating that and trying to build that into the system so it is future-proof, that you do have that opportunity to be interoperable, not proprietary to one port or one aspect of the supply chain.
No, just to follow up on that, in terms of kind of looking at those standards, how do you go about that, and who's involved in that process there? Are you involving the technology companies? Are you involving the different stakeholders in order to ensure that there's, the communication is going across the board so you're able to develop that standard?
Yeah, I think certainly from the port perspective, the processes and platforms that they're developing are really with the technology companies, whether it's IBM or GE or others, and certainly they're looking to those experts in that area
to provide that expertise in terms of how do you make it standardized and interoperable.
Yeah, because of course you've then got the challenge of your legacy systems as well, right? And trying to deal with that, which is the same for I guess, for the OEMs as well, right? Implementing new systems, you always have to deal with the legacy systems that are already in place as well, right?
No, absolutely, and every OEM is different. It's a competitive advantage, and sharing a standard might not be conducive to that advantage. So it's difficult. It's difficult, but I think it has to happen if we're going to move forward with what we're talking about.
We believe that, well, the port business is really traditional business. So in this matter that you have to push the reset button and go to the technology companies and say, you guys are going to develop this, because for them this is really not rocket science to develop what the industry needs. Yeah. And this is also what we have done. So, and then we take a share in that new technology company.
Sure. And I guess the other question is, it requires investment. So who are the stakeholders that you're going to try and get the investment from, right? Because from an OEM perspective, how much investment are you prepared to make in those kind of systems, the transportation systems, whether it's the port, the processor, and then how much investment do you want from other parties as well, right, to make it happen?
In the models that we have developed, starting point is that it should be a cost reduction for all parties involved. And this is the first step you need before you can bring any party at the table. So this is the model that you need. And then the OEMs, shipping lines will be interested for that. As a port authority, you can even give kind of a rebate when you use our system. And then to make it interesting, we have developed revenue sharing models.
So questions again from the audience? Not at the moment. We should warm them up a little bit. So I know we've talked about a lot of the kind of future technologies. I think, what are the technologies can we utilize today to address some of today's challenges? I mean, if we were to say what's the number one problem in terms of planning and preparation, as you mentioned, Michael, what kind of technologies and what kind of process adjustments can we make in order to meet some of those current challenges as well?
Right. I think we have to stop fighting for scarce resources. Again, it's probably a millennial viewpoint, but let's share what's out there and utilize the labor and the assets in the most efficient way possible. That's what we can do immediately while we develop some of these technologies and agree upon a standard. Until we do that, we're going to have the same conversations year over year over year, until one day someone's going to come in and say, you didn't figure it out, here I am, and here's the technology that you have to use, that you're going to use. Let's ask taxi cab drivers if they wanted rideshare. Probably not, but it happened to them because they maintained the same model, the same way of doing business for decades.
I think to some degree you're seeing it in one area is not directly related to the connected environment discussion, but it still, I think, shows historically, you look at a couple of ports like the Port of Seattle and the Port of Tacoma, were very strong competitors within the Pacific Northwest. They decided along kind of the perspective of sharing assets, that instead of consistently competing for cargo, competing in terms of facility development, et cetera, that they formed an alliance to really share those assets and determine what assets in each port are best suited for what market, and then be able to market that destination as an alliance. Similarly, when I mentioned the port optimizer that the Port of Los Angeles partnered with GE on, and while that's also, they're looking and offering that beyond that, as I mentioned, Long Beach, they had discussions between Los Angeles and Long Beach, also very strong competitors, obviously, in Southern California, literally pretty much occupying the same harbor, and yet they're coming together as part of this port optimization. So to some degree, I think it's that recognition of, if we're going to be
efficient moving forward and successful, some of these barriers that we might have had historically just have to start coming down.
In Europe, we're facing a huge lack of trucking capacity. And then if you combine that with the fact that like around 30% of trucks are running empty, there's a huge opportunity. So all these technology companies did not look at the logistics sector, let's say 5 years ago, because they considered it as an old sector, the opportunities are elsewhere. Today, their eyes are on the logistics sector, and then we have to just tell them that they develop the technology which they can copy-paste from other industries for which they have worked, that we provide them the channels and the sales and marketing tools to get in touch with the right people in the logistics sector who can push things forward. And this is working quite well.
Okay. So how does that work?
Well, we have the development of some bidding platforms for empty capacity in Europe. So you can imagine if you have big Eastern European trucking companies running fleets of 5,000 to 10,000 trucks, that this is quite interesting for them.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I think, of course, trucking capacity as a whole is a major issue, and of course, there's globally there's big issues around driver shortages, and there doesn't seem to be any kind of solution to address that at the moment, right? Other than kind of self-driving trucks and things like that, which is a little bit way off the mark at the moment. But you know, I know you mentioned something in your presentation about asset sharing and those kind of things, Michael. And maybe this platform is a solution to address that, because you've got the empty miles that are there. That's of course waste. So how do we go about kind of addressing that?
No, it's very similar to what I've already said. It's a lot of it too is getting the vehicles out in the correct cadence in the right order to our providers to make them as efficient as possible. Sometimes we tend to process vehicles that are best for us, but perhaps we need to rope in our providers to do what's best for them and work on that end to give them what they need to operate their operation more effectively.
Sure. Okay. Of course, feel free to get involved in the conversation. Well, I know we're talking amongst ourselves, but of course, you're free to make comments or ask questions yourself. So, otherwise, I'll just start maybe picking on some of you guys out there as well. So, maybe I will do that anyway. Rick. Some comments from you about how we address some of these capacity issues. There's a mic coming just behind you.
Yeah, pretty much the capacity issues, that we face in the ports today. The key thing is, definitely is what I said previously, is having the visibility of what's coming into the port and leaving out of the port. And also on top of that, what we're challenged with today is just the truck capacity. I know for General Motors and some of the truck carriers in here, we were faced with that on the West Coast. That was a huge issue for us, and it caused, a lot of backups where we were unable to land vessels in the port. So I think definitely, and I know that's not an easy fix, but I know technology should be definitely a main focus to handle that.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else like to make some comments? Dennis.
I thought I would speak up before you called on me. So, Michael, do you internally, do you have some regular assessment where you look at your distribution centers and your port operations and evaluate the footprint and flow of how those are physically laid out to see if you can do a better throughput or reduce your cost operations? Is that an internal activity that you guys conduct?
Yes, absolutely. I think all OEMs run those exercises, and when we can make the investment or make the process changes, we do so. It's incremental, I would say. I think with greater investments on our end, it could be even better. But again, those exercises do occur on a regular basis, certainly.
Because the cost of handling all this product and your cost of your footprint is so expensive, and And personally, I've always thought it's a great investment to spend that time and effort to reevaluate facility footprints and the flow and what have you, because capacity is the name of the game at each of these facilities. There's just X amount of space at each one of them, and if you can improve the layout and the flow and the footprint, great opportunity.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we did that in Davisville, in Rhode Island, where our load lanes were, what, a mile and a half from the actual operation, so vehicles were driving a mile and a half down the road to get to the truckaway area, and we reorganized a lot to put it not even less than 0.1 miles away from where the vehicles were actually being produced and built. So that drastically cut down on vehicle handling time. And we were able to reduce labor as a result, save some cost, and produce more vehicles per day. So yeah, that's an example of exactly what you're talking about.
Thank you.
And just staying on that point, I guess, in terms of Europe versus the US, in terms of, you know, optimizing those facilities and, you know, building multi-story car parks and, yeah, of course, even advanced parking facilities as well, right, where you have embedded robotics and automation and things like that. What's the difference from your perspective, from a European perspective, how you see that kind of moving forward? And then maybe, Kurt, how do you see kind of investment in those kind of optimization of the land asset that you have moving forward?
Well, we do our monthly analysis and we look at KPIs. We handle 8,500 vessels on an annual basis, and congestion has a price tag. So we look at it from a vessel perspective, the connection times from the trains arriving in the port to the terminals, because these trains are like getting 800 meters to a kilometer long, so they come in mainly at night, not to block the day-to-day train traffic. And this, our main goal is to optimize the rotation and the flows in the port to avoid the fact that terminals would have to invest in multi-car deck storage, because the cost factor, for that is ×5, ×6, instead of just plain land.
You say in the U.S., I talked about the Toyota facility in Long Beach more from a energy electrical supply standpoint, but part of that, and it relates to the gentleman's comment and question earlier, that that facility, part of that, while the power generation is obviously a significant part of that planned upgrading and modernization of the facility, a lot of the other aspects of that relate to other efficiencies unrelated to, say, the electrical supply, et cetera, in terms of the throughput of the facility itself. So those types of things obviously are ongoing, related to the finished vehicles, as well as, again, container facilities, et cetera. Again, recognizing that those assets are limited. You're not going to be able to obviously develop a limitless supply. You're going to have to get more through those facilities, whether they're handling containers, vehicles, whatever the cargo might be.
Yeah. From your perspective as an OEM, what would you like to see, you know, at some of these terminals? You know, would you like to see more development of these parking infrastructures, or, I mean, capacity at ports is an issue, right?
It is. It's a huge investment. Parking structures are millions and millions of dollars. I would like to see first attempts to utilize the space that's there better. I think that's probably a better investment than parking structures. Let's give that a shot, or else we're not addressing the underlying problems that's potentially leading to that congestion. If we have a better flow, if we have a better understanding of which vehicles need to move and by when and with who to where, I think, you know, we're having less conversation about capacity, about space issues. Let's try that first. Before we build up and build out, let's try to utilize the space we have better.
Okay, well, any other questions, comments? No? Oh, there's one at the back there.
I apologize for having another comment, forgive me. But two things. One, in support of Mr. Van Dam's comment, I think when I spoke here 3 years ago, I said that this industry needed something similar to the travel industry like Galileo and Amadeus, because therefore now you have visibility of everybody's inventory as well as when everybody's doing it. So therefore, your space will be much better utilized. So I agree with you on that. The other side is I listen to this autonomous and I look at what I deal with every day at the ports. Have you considered, and this is for the other gentleman, how is this autonomous movement of vehicles going to support union activity? Because that's the first thing I hear. When you say your car's going to drive itself off of the ship and drive itself onto the ship, I just say, oh boy.
Yeah, it's I can answer that question. Yeah, we have a union operation in Rhode Island, and I wouldn't want to be the ones to tell them that vehicles are going to drive themselves off. Yeah, it's something that'll have to be explored. I'm not sure if it's a solution in those operations or not.
Maybe Kurt, that's something for, how do you go about addressing the labor pool and adapting the implementation of new technologies and the labor pool? How do you adjust?
That certainly is a difficult issue, whether it's on the eastern Gulf Coast with the Longshoremen Union or with ILW on the West Coast. The whole issue, again, regardless of cargo, is in terms of automation, things like that, technologies. What does that mean for the workforce? And probably at a minimum, it relates to some sizable changes in terms of, again, the skill sets required for the employees. So that is something that obviously needs to be part of the collective bargaining discussions as they move forward in the future to address those. It's certainly not an easy issue, and those issues of automation, again, whether it's autonomous vehicle moving itself or an automated terminal handling facility equipment, has some of those same uncertainties as it relates to labor.
The UAW had similar issues when we introduced robots on the assembly line. But as Kurt said, you adapt. It might be a reduction. I don't think we'll ever get to a place where human interaction, human labor is not needed. But it'll reduce, and skill sets will have to develop to work with the technology.
Yeah, the human element is always going to be there, and is always going to be required. Because of course, the time it takes, for you to teach a car to drive itself from there to there, you could, ask somebody to just drive it. So let's just end with a couple of quick kind of red and green card straw polls. So let's start with who believes blockchain will transform or help transform the vehicle logistics industry. So red for yes and green for no. Just to confuse me.
Yeah.
So, blockchain, transformation, red, yes? Yes. All right. Okay. So, blockchain, start investing. There you go. Who believes autonomous vehicles will help speed up the finished vehicle logistics process? Green for yes, red for no. All right, so lots of greens. Okay, all right, that sounds good. All right, well, unless you've got any other comments you'd like to make? No? Okay, so let's, I think we're nearly ready for lunch, so thanks very much for your presentations and your comments, really interesting discussion there. So this afternoon we have a little bit of a different layout in terms of format. So we'll be going into ideas labs, which I think Chris mentioned this morning. They're more interactive workshop discussion groups. So we have 4 different sessions. One's looking at technology upgrades, and that'll be led by Trish Zerek from AIAG. We have Rick Powers, who will be leading the one on velocity, speed, and throughput. And then Joe Haney from Accelerated Logistics will be looking at the trucking environment. And then we have another one, keeping rail on track, which will be led by Jordan from Canadian Pacific Railway. So those will take place after lunch, and they'll be in the rooms there. There'll be signposts. One will be in here. So again, that's a chance for you to get interactive, talk about some of the issues and challenges you're having, and maybe come up with some innovative ideas to some of those problems. So lunch will be served through there, and we'll be back for those ideas labs at 2 o'clock. Thanks very much.